It's my honor today to have Professor Daniel McCarthy. Welcome to the CVO Live. We're going to cover why companies are struggling so much.
We've seen some companies that have been able to kind of increase prices, just kind of pass that on to the consumer without a significant drop in demand. Candy makers, just as kind of one funny example, and they've been able to get away with it.
Hello, and welcome to our show. Professor McCarthy of Marketing at the Emory University. His research interests include the customer lifetime value and the marketing finance interface. I want to touch on that a bit. I think it's a very incredible. It's an incredible subject to touch on. You popularized the customer-based corporate valuation, a methodology that drives any traditional valuation model off of the underlying behaviors of the target company's customer. Your work has been featured in major media outlets such as the Harvard Business School Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, and also your research has been accepted and published in top-tier academic journals. In addition to these roles and responsibilities at Emory, you also co-founded and you were chief statistician for Zodiac, a predictive customer analytics software as a service firm that was acquired by Nike in March 2018. And you also co-founded Theta Equity Partners to revolutionize how firms value companies through customer-based corporate valuation. So that being said, thanks again for being here, and I'm looking forward to this episode. I think this would be an amazing episode. We also had your partner in crime, Professor Peter Fader, here, and I'm looking forward to this one.
No, I know, and thank you. That's quite a mouthful of an introduction. So,
yeah, I wanted to have for our audience to have the full picture. So today in this episode, what we're going to cover, we're going to cover why companies are struggling so much, why some of them are resistant to adopting the CLV, how the companies are governing their decisions, how the C-level executives are relying on data to make those kind of decisions, and how can we help the data people to leverage, to generate insights, and then to optimize the customer lifetime value. And that being said, I will start by asking you to give us some context about why you became interested in customer lifetime value in the first place, so that our listeners will find this for you. Of course, they know about myself that I'm obsessed with making ends meet. I used to be obsessed with making ends meet in my own e-commerce company, and let's say the struggle led me to discover and to optimize customer lifetime value. But please tell us about yourself. Tell us how you became aware about the importance of customer lifetime value.
I was really through Pete Fader. Yeah, so I'd started my career in finance. I had worked at a hedge fund for about 6 years, and we did kind of traditional corporate valuation. So I'd kind of been born and brought up taking all of the finance classes that one would take at a business school and a finance program. So I kind of had this background in finance. I went back for my Ph.D. at Wharton in statistics. I spent a lot of time thinking about prediction problems as well. And it was in the second year of the program that I was introduced to Pete. And in some sense, customer lifetime value, you could think of it as being a very financial object, in the sense that it is truly supposed to be the net present value of a customer. How much a customer is worth. If you were to give the company some amount of money in exchange for that customer's future profitability, what would that number be? And so, yes, that was really kind of what drew me to it. Was it's kind of a very interesting object, and it's a very hard prediction problem. I'd say that the fact that it was somewhat misunderstood, I think also drew me to it, that there was scope for improvement in how we could kind of think about measuring it and what it all means and how we can kind of align it with how a finance person would view it. So yeah, so that was really, that's kind of what drew me to the concept.
Yeah, I'll continue with the big question. From your perspective, why are companies struggling so much these days, and how they can get help by focusing on CLV in order to make progress?
I think there's a lot of different things that have been going on, and so I'm not sure there's kind of a one size fits all answer to that question, but I think some of the various factors that have led to issues are, for one, a lot of these companies, they started off as private companies, raising capital from VC investors. And I think VC investors have historically had a very strong focus on growth over profitability. And obviously, I'm a big believer in the value of growth, and it's very important. But I think that a bit too much focus on growth relative to good economics is problematic. And so I think a lot of companies have kind of been trained just to grow for growth's sake, and it worked for them, all the way through their IPO. But then after their IPO, they're kind of left in a tough spot because public markets investors are a little bit more interested in seeing some sort of path to profitability. So I think some of the incentives of those earlier rounds has led some companies to just be focused on the wrong objectives. So I think, that's really one of the big ones. I think recently there's been a lot of trouble stemming from COVID and now, a seeming impending recession, that companies had gotten faked out by either the sharp decline in revenues that they saw, or I think, even more so, the businesses that saw extreme increases in demand because of the pandemic. And they kind of took that as being the new normal, like the world isn't going to go back to how it used to. And what we've kind of seen in a majority of categories is that demand has actually gone back to what it was. And so all those companies that had set up a lot of infrastructure to be able to kind of cater to peak demand, they're now kind of eating those investments. And so, so you have that going on, and then you've got recession. And I think a lot of people, they're really not sure what a base level of demand is. And so it really is kind of a confusing time, I think, for a lot of companies for a variety of reasons.
And how do you see customer lifetime value helping those companies, Daniel?
Well, a lot of these different drivers of the health of customers have been changing significantly. So we've seen CACs. If you're an e-commerce company, we've seen CACs fall pretty sharply after the immediate onset of COVID, but we've seen them come right back. And in fact, Wayfair reported earnings today. We're seeing that their customer acquisition cost is actually higher than it was before the pandemic began. So, yes, it really has a direct effect on the overall profitability of businesses like Wayfair. So, I think you really, a lot of what customer-based corporate valuation is all about is showing how CLV, it's not just this quantity that kind of exists in a vacuum separated from the company's financials. It's really directly driving the company's financials and ultimately its valuation. So being able to kind of better understand how purchase patterns are changing is giving us really valuable information about the go forward profit potential for companies like Wayfair.
So, as I get it, as I see your perspective, it's about how to drive profitability. Yeah, that's the context that you're seeing, and we're all assisting on that. At this bloodbath which is happening on the retail, as more players in the market, we are seeing customer acquisition costs going higher than they used to. So basically, customer lifetime value is only a measure. It's only about monitoring, or it's also something that could become lucrative. How can you improve the profitability once you track, you monitor the customer lifetime value?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. And maybe actually just to kind of back up, I know we talked about the impact on CAC. Obviously, one of the other big things that's been happening is everything's been getting more expensive. And so, again, when we think about the drivers of customer lifetime value, it's really customer acquisition cost, retention, purchase frequency, basket size, and contribution margin. And those are the different legs of the stool. So the cost inflation has been it's been really hurting the contribution margin. And we've just also seen a lot of fluctuation in terms of purchase frequency. And so while companies have been doing their best to kind of push some of that cost inflation through, raising, basket size to be able to help offset, the cost increases that they're incurring, I think they've not necessarily been very good at being able to do that. So, it's having a lot of effect on a lot of different drivers. In terms of how you can kind of make some of those drivers better, it really depends on the process. I mentioned price increases. If you have very strong brand, I've come to really buy into the notion that a strong brand is one that has the ability to increase price. If you have no pricing power, there's a question of exactly what your brand strength is even really doing for you. So it's exactly in times like these where if you really do have that strong brand and you see your costs going up, you want to be able to kind of price that through. And so what it's going to do is it's going to increase your average order value, but it's also, essentially because your costs are moving up, your contribution profitability may actually be staying the same. But I think in this sort of environment, having that hold steady is actually kind of a win. So, so we've seen some companies we've seen some companies that have been able to kind of increase prices, just kind of pass that on to the consumer without a significant drop in demand. We've seen a lot of stories from companies like, candy makers, just as kind of one funny example. They've been raising prices by like 20%, and they've been able to get away with it. But I think a lot of other businesses, because they actually don't have a whole lot of pricing power, and because of competition, as you were alluding to, they feel like they really can't do it, because if they did, demand would plummet. And so even though they would help, kind of keep their unit profitability the same, the number of units that they would sell would fall so much that it just wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So one way to leverage customer lifetime value is to have awareness about the unit economics of your business, because you have these 5 legs that you mentioned, from customer acquisition to retention, purchase frequency, contribution margin, and AOV. But besides that, you can also, let's say, tweak, right? So your suggestion would be to experiment with price, so that you can see how this is going to affect your customer lifetime value. And I think an important component here is that you can also experiment. Depending on how big is your brand, you can basically make some experiments on different locations or markets or different product lines, depending on how big or small your company is. Moving a bit. Please.
Just to kind of double down on that, I actually really like how you frame that, because experimentation is more than just price. And a lot of the experimentation that we'll work with companies on is experimenting with their spending in different acquisition channels. And, so that experimentation tool, I think, is a really, really powerful one, if you're set up for it, to be able to take each of those different levers that we talked about, customer acquisition costs, purchase frequency, retention, basket size, contribution margin, and just do things that can help potentially expand each of them. For customer acquisition costs, if you run the right experiments, if you understand your customer lifetime value by channel, then in theory you can use that to acquire better customers, or to acquire the same value customers but at a lower cost. And so, either improving your CAC and or improving the average value of customers after acquisition for the same amount of acquisition costs. So I 100% agree.
So moving a bit further, how easy or hard or difficult is for companies to adopt such a model? Because I don't know how you are seeing. I don't see a resistance necessarily at the practitioner level. The data people are getting it and they want it and they adopt it. They make those models. However, those models are staying at the data teams level. They can't let's say uh, produce change at the top of the organization. So the execs are not adopting CLV, or they have this resistance to change, because we have the old way of governing a company, where you have the P&L, the financials. You have this duo, CEO plus CFO, and they look at the P&L, they look at the margin, they look at this, let's say, historical data to say, but they are not adopting this predictive unit economics like CLV. And that means it's like we have some smart people in the data team, but we are not listening to them because we predict that the growth will be such and such. They look at, and for me, it's puzzling. I don't know how it is for you, because I don't see an adoption at the pace that it would be necessarily right now, as the market is not that frugal as it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. I think, to some degree, you need buy-in from the top of the organization to really be able to make the sort of change that I think many companies would need to properly leverage CLV. If it's something that's just originating out of the data team, then there's only so much that they can do, So I think cultural change is a big aspect of it. And I think, to some degree, the two big things that have been helping to improve that have been, one, people like Pete Fader, who have been talking about customer centricity. And I think his books are, they're accessible. They're not technical. And really it's kind of, I don't know if you call it a gateway drug or what, but it's a path into the C-suite, to kind of get those CEOs thinking about this sort of stuff and saying, that's really important. That kind of makes a lot of sense. And so maybe we should make those investments in expanding our capabilities. So I think that's one. Obviously, the one that I've been focusing most on is on the financial side. So obviously the CEO cares a lot, but this would register even more strongly, I think, with the CFO and the head of investor relations. And again, the idea here is we're getting investors to wake up to the importance of customer lifetime value and of these drivers. And as they're asking the management team more and more questions about, what's going on with your CAC? What's going on with your retention? And they're looking to these data sets to help inform those questions. Then the executives need to be able to answer the questions. And so, they're kind of getting beaten over the head with CLV from the investors. Great reason to be able to, great reason to start making those sorts of investments. So I think, to some degree, cultural change is it's important. It's almost required. And I think being able to kind of wake the CFO up to the importance of these measures, I think that's going to hopefully go a long way. But time will tell.
Yeah, I just had a presentation at a retail event yesterday, and I was telling the same thing, that you can't drive change unless you ask yourself initially the right questions, and without a question, there is no answer to fall into, like Professor Clayton Christensen stated at some point. But I guess it's all a matter of let's say suggesting the top exec to ask themselves and their teams more questions, because the questions are pretty simple. How are we doing? How the future can look better, brighter for us? What's going on within our company? And if you think about it, you can get from a question like how are we doing, you can get to a simple question like how are our customer base doing? Are we acquiring more customers? Are we losing more customers? And our existing customers are, if you ask those questions, you will lead eventually to questions regarding their behavior, like their purchase frequency, their retention, how expensive it is to acquire them, and that will lead to adopting the customer lifetime value as let's say a solid unit economic. Because I think right now CLV is being seen just like a geekish way of looking at the at the company, not like a proper way to evaluate the health of the company. And I want to touch what you're doing over there with Professor Fader at Tita regarding how to evaluate a company by looking at their the customer lifetime value.
Yes, it's really a way to help elevate that conversation. And I feel like part of the reason why, I'm just going to be blunt here, part of the reason why CLV has not been adopted as much as it should is because there's been so much loose thinking within marketing as to what CLV should be and is. And just within marketing academia, we'll define it in 10 different ways. And if we have no agreement within ourselves as to what it's supposed to mean, how can we expect other people to buy into some definition? It's kind of like having 10 different types of phone chargers for all these different types of phones. There's just no uniform standard. And so it's really hard to get broad-based adoption of it. I think there's also been a lot of very loose thinking. And it's partially understandable because marketers are not necessarily finance professionals. But I think it's led to a lot of kind of dilute thinking as to exactly, we'll kind of define CLV and talk about CLV in financial terms, but because we don't really know what we're talking about, we sound like an alien to someone who actually knows finance. And I think it's kind of done a disservice to the whole field, that we just are, we're kind of showing people that we don't really know finance. And so we can't really embed CLV within a proper financial framework. But in truth, it can be. And I think this work is really a way to be able to make those connections a lot stronger. And so, yes, we have a lot of ground that we need to cover. But I think going back to your example, like today, Peloton, they released their earnings and they're getting hammered right now. Their stock is down a lot as we speak. And one of the big reasons why is because they had weak guidance. They said that, we had said this before about what we're going to do, and now maybe, but maybe not. And they're kind of like putting that seed out there that maybe the results in the future are going to be weaker. So that weak guidance kind of begs this next question of like, okay, so if revenues are going to come in weak, well, why is that? Are we going to get less revenue from new adoptions? Or we get less revenue from our existing base? And then you kind of keep that thread going. It's like, where do you stop? If we're going to get less revenue from new adoptions, is that because we're going to spend less on marketing? Or is it because we're going to spend just as much, but it's that spend is not going to be as productive? We're not going to bring in as many new customers. And then you kind of start thinking about the existing customers in the same way. Is the issue with the existing customers that they're just not engaging as frequently, and so they're churning out more? What's going on with pricing? Maybe we had some thoughts as to what we could do to price, but we're not able to do it. But it kind of breaks down that framework, and it exposes this accounting identity that revenue has to come from customers, new versus existing. You bring some in at some cost, and so we can start to be able to think about that revenue guidance in a much more principled way. And even though it won't necessarily answer all of your questions as to exactly how we can improve these things, we can't say, well, our guidance used to be X, but now our marketing productivity is worse. And so that's the problem, like now that's why we're going to miss revenue, instead of just saying, well, revenue is going to be lower. So it at least gives you a framework to think about the problem and what exactly the problem is, so that maybe you can kind of double down on that, or maybe you can find some other lever that you can pull to kind of offset that.
Yeah, I guess we're what we're assisting at right now is this disconnection and lack of internal alignment, which is being caused by the lack of proper data. As you've said, the ones at Peloton, they've been not well advised towards what they should be doing, and that gave a message in the market that made their stock go down and plummet, and also their business wasn't thriving as it used to be, because we do remember the glory days when the pandemic hit. But if we are to look at the levers of growth, and because basically it's around if you think it through, it's around those decision makers at the top of the organizations. They are not realizing what are the levers of growth, and they are not even monitoring those properly, because I don't know if you know too many companies which are monitoring this properly, and aligning everyone around, hey, our purchase frequency is 1.92 and we need to get that to 2.1, and those are the initiatives to increase the purchase frequency in the next quarter. And you don't even monitor those things which are contributing to the CLV, because I get it, CLV, it's like an average, is not changing that fast, but there are workarounds, right? You can look at the CLV for, I don't know, 90 days, the first 90 days, and you can do cohorts. There are workarounds that you can do. But what I'm seeing is that the lack of adoption of those unit economics leads to a lack of initiatives which are aligned towards the moving the real levers of growth for these companies, and the lack of initiatives are giving us those results. So I see this as a huge opportunity, even in this let's say grim environment that that the retail is going through.
Yeah, I think the grim environment, it's kind of doing two things. On the negative side, unfortunately, it's limiting budgets. And so a lot of companies, because they're facing tough economic times, they don't have quite as much discretionary money to throw at projects that might seem more speculative. And so, a falling tide can hurt all the boats. I guess I don't know if that's the right way to put the phrase in reverse. But I think the other thing that it's doing is it's really motivating a focus on path to profitability. And you see all these companies that are making all these, making all these cuts, doing the headcount reductions and doing what they need to do to be able to show that they are a viable business. They do have a path to profitability, even if they're not profitable now. And what is CLV to me, to some degree, it is one of the best measures of a company's ability to have a path to profitability, if they're not profitable yet. And the idea is, again, if we have a certain amount of budget, and we know that, for that next marginal customers that we acquire, we're making a very healthy profit on them. It doesn't mean that we'll be profitable today, because we have to spend a certain amount of money on overhead to keep the customer acquisition engine running. But we know that if we're able to kind of continue to acquire, more and more customers into the future, that's going to allow us to become more and more profitable. So yes, I think it really is one of the best measures of path to profitability. And so again, as companies start thinking about path to profitability more, they should be thinking about CLV more than they did before. And maybe to kind of flip that logic around, imagine that we were in this voodoo environment where venture capitalists will just kind of keep throwing money at companies that grow even if their CLV is terrible. Well, do they need to care about CLV? I mean, maybe, but it's kind of like they don't need to as much, because they know that whatever shortfalls that may be structural that exist, they're just going to keep getting bailed out by the capital markets. And so I think, again, because the capital is not quite as available, they need to start thinking about CLV more, because that's going to help them kind of get to where they need to be.
Yeah, one question that emerged while you were pointing that is that if you think it through, the CLV is not a measure of a department's success, is the measure of the whole company's success. Therefore, CLV should be a way to see how a CEO is doing his or her job, right? Because if you took this company under these economic conditions and your peers got there and you got there, then you could see that you've made your job. However, the curse of being a CEO, and the more my company is growing, the more I see this happening, is that you can't do things directly, right? You need to do things indirectly, which means you need to make your people want to adopt those initiatives that are coming bottom up or top to bottom. And in order to do so, you need to understand which are the levers of improving the customer lifetime value. In our, as we are doing a lot of optimization projects to improve customer lifetime value, we see that even though it has been more adopted, the use case for CLV was more around improving the customer acquisition cost and deciding on which channels to focus and whatever. We see that CLV is also affected by other pillars. Basically, it's not only marketing, which is basically what you say about the products that other departments are sourcing or producing or creating. It's also a matter of what was the quality of those products, how well they are doing their job as products, and also it's a matter of how well other departments, which are the customer experience related, fulfillment, logistics, and that's why CLV is such a cool, from my perspective, way to see the health of a company, because it can align the entire organization about around what's going on.
Yeah, fully agreed. And I think that it kind of really brings us back to that point about needing adoption by the CEO, because ultimately CLV is a very high level measure. And in some sense, it's a good thing and a bad thing. I think it's a good thing in that it should get the attention then of the CEO and the CFO, because it is one of the best measures, the path to profitability for the company as a whole. But if you think about the marketing department, sometimes they don't know quite what to do with it, because there's so many other things that affect it. And if you think about the sales team, if you're the prospecting sales team, you know what you care about? You care about bringing people in. And so you could think about that as being pretty myopically focused on CAC, unless you give them an incentive to acquire good customers. They just want to bring them in. But like account managers, they're going to be much more focused on generating the repeat orders from the existing customers. But if they're kind of given bad customers to start with, then they're kind of being put at an immediate disadvantage. And so each of these different departments of the company, they're all kind of focused on different aspects a little bit more in terms of CLV. And so that's kind of where you hope that the CEO or someone else in the C-suite kind of acts as the quarterback that helps coordinate all the pieces and get them moving in the right direction, and knows where to make the investments, and also to set the incentives for those groups so that they're not, doing things that really might be myopically good for that one thing that they could be focusing on, but may not be good for CLV as a whole, or really, for customer-based corporate valuation as a whole.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think one aspect that should be touched is that is not only the average CLV. You can break down CLV by category, by acquisition channel. You can break it by location. You can break it by the stores, right? We have retailers which are having multiple stores, and if you look at the context, right, you can see the contrast between what's the CLV this quarter against the last quarter by category or by store, and you can identify the outliers, and you can see maybe we have some store managers which are doing a great job at keeping their customers, or making a different offering a different customer journey. Maybe they are calling out the customers after the purchase, because you can do so many things. For instance, I gave this example, but I think it's great. There is a marketplace in Belgium. They on the French part, right? So they are speaking French, and they realize that the salaries in Madagascar, where they have French speaking people, are 20 times less than in Belgium. So they hire 20 people, and they are calling every customer, with a great script, and they speak very well French. And guess what? Their CLV got up by 27%, which means they can acquire customers with 27% more than their competitors. And there are so many workarounds that you can do if you think it through. But I guess in larger organizations, those kind of initiatives are not there due to the fact that they are not keeping their eyes on the price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think what I'll often say is there's three things that you need to really make a CLV strategy work. You need great data, you need good definitions and measures, and then you need good models. And then I guess you also need the tooling to be able to take action on the results. And so without without one of those four, you're kind of not able to fully execute. And I think one of the points that you're speaking to is on the data side, that a lot of companies don't have the data recording systems to be able to know what those relationships are. And so if you can't see that in your data set, you can't do anything with it. You won't have that. You won't be able to run the regression and see that coefficient pop out of the page. So being able to kind of invest in the data to be able to have the fields that you need, where you can actually see all of the customer activity at the individual level, and you can know who it was who may have serviced them. That becomes extremely important to knowing how you can kind of change things to make things better. But obviously the other big thing it alludes to is you need the right predictive model to compute CLV, and the right predictive model. It's not just about being hyper accurate at some sort of aggregate level. You need to be accurate, but you can have a CLV model that does very well at the individual level, and so you have different values for every single customer, and that can allow you to take advantage of the fact that we know most customers have low value, a small number have high value, and we can really fully exploit that when we kind of take that in conjunction with the data to be able to understand how different measures of service and whatnot may be influencing CLV, all else being equal.
Yeah, I've been involved into a conversation today on LinkedIn around these two schools of thought regarding focusing on acquisition or focusing on retention nowadays, because the CAC is going up and whatever. And it was that example brought by from the How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp, around the fact that you should be focusing not on target marketing but on mass marketing, because Pareto is not really Pareto, because if you look at some data, 20% of the best 20% of the customers are not generating 80% of the revenue, but they are generating 50%, more like 50% of the revenue. And I want to hear your take on this. Of course, I have my own opinions, and thank God we also have some data from 2,000 retailers to rely on. But what's your opinion around how to use the CLV model in order to improve the acquisition and retention, taking into consideration that without new customers, according to I don't know, not only Professor Sharp, but only through logic, right? So people will churn eventually. They will be gone. But however, I think there are some caveats here, and I want to hear your opinion on this subject.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to what he says, and so I kind of I really like Byron and his way of thinking, which might sound surprising, but he's one of the few who is actually very empirical, and I think in his data sets, which are primarily CPG based, he does find that revenue concentration tends to be more like 60-20. And then for some categories, maybe it even goes down into the 50s. So that I don't doubt. But I think the key then is to see exactly what categories he's talking to and exactly what measure he's using to characterize concentration. And as you kind of had alluded to, the measure that he's using is revenue, and the categories that he's studying are CPG. And if we just take a step back and think, well, what is it that we actually care about? Do companies, are they valued by revenue? I can go out and give product away for free and generate a whole bunch of revenue, but if I don't generate any profit, I haven't done myself any good, And I think everyone knows intuitively, we don't actually care about revenue. I mean, we care about revenue, but it's only to the extent that it implies that we're actually creating some profit, or at least that we have the potential to create profit in the future. And so as soon as we start looking at profit measures, things become more extreme. And the work that I've done on that problem, it actually, I think some of the conclusions are similar to what he's saying. But if you just think about it intuitively, the more dimensions along which customers have the ability to differentiate themselves, the more we're going to see extreme concentration measures. And so non-subscription businesses tend to be more polarized than subscription businesses, because now sources of variation aren't just retention and, whatever subscription that the person had started with. Your very best customers could be buying a lot more than your less good customers, and they could be spending a lot more when they buy. As soon as you move to profitability, that's just another dimension that can differentiate your very best customers. So the very best ones, they tend to not, be discount hunters. They're not waiting until you do that annual sale to load up the truck. They're people like me, honestly, who are probably leaving a lot of money on the table, literally, and just buying whenever I need clothes. And I just buy at list price. So those list price buyers versus the non-list price buyers, suddenly, you've got another dimension. And then we have customer acquisition cost. And when you start layering in customer acquisition cost, then you realize that a lot of these retailers, the vast majority of the customers, they're actually losing money on. Like their CLVs are zero or marginally positive, but sometimes they're even negative. And so that top 20%, they're actually, it's not even 80-20, it's like 120-20. The other 80% is losing money on. Yes, it's like, okay, we can talk about revenue, but it's kind of like talking about how many fairies can fit on the tip of a pin. It's like, okay, I like it, but now let's move to the measures that we really ultimately care about. And so the other thing was about the categories. So he'll focus on CPG categories. And I think that there is some debate about revenue concentration within CPG. I'm not even going to go there. It's not the world that I study. I focus more on direct-to-consumer, retail, e-commerce, and categories outside of CPG. And all I can say is, again, you kind of alluded to it as well. Outside of CPG, if we're thinking about mobile gaming, if we're thinking about business-to-business companies, even revenue concentration is way more extreme than that. And we all know it. We all know it. Like a whole bunch of people will install a game, and then most of them won't do anything else. And at B2B businesses, I give this example that a lot of B2B businesses, they sell to two types of people: seed state startups and McKinsey. And they sell by seat. And so you have seed stage startups that they're on the cheapo plan, and they have 10 employees or 20 employees. And you have McKinsey that has thousands of employees, and they're on the most expensive plan. And so it's like, of course, we know for that business that 50-20, it's not going to hold. And so I don't understand why it is that you look at the comments to these discussions. This really gets me going. You look at the comments in these discussions, and these people will just kind of take the CPG results, and they'll just say, well, this is just how every single consumer is in any possible business. And they don't think more deeply about exactly what it might mean at the category level.
I want to touch on this subject because this comparison, I think it's the trap is of course to extrapolate by looking at a single category. As you've said, you look at the CPG and what happens with other categories. And another thing is the maturity level of a company, because not all the companies are having such a high penetration, right? We have even in CPG, you need to pick your battles. So if you don't use a segmentation method such as RFM, for instance, to look at what are the customers which are having the highest customer lifetime value, are coming back and are buying again, they have the behavior that we want, and what they are buying. Because if you don't ask these simple questions, you can shoot in the dark. You can do this spray and pray approach to do this mass marketing approach, but you don't have infinite resources or so high resources like every established brand out there. So you have to be more careful about how you spend your money, on which products you are betting. Because if you look at the first products purchase, and if you look at the CLV down the line, if you have a customer which starts with this shampoo against the other one, then maybe you can find you can get some insights. So you can push shampoo A against shampoo B. So this type of endeavor, of course, requires some in-depth analysis, but it's way more cheaper than to I don't know, subsidize the revenue leakage to Facebook by paying to their
Mhm.
clients, or invest more on TikTok ads. So at the end of the day, it's around acquisition, of course, but focusing on customer lifetime value, understanding your best customers will improve your acquisition. It's not like this or that. It's basically monitoring CLV and looking at the data, understanding who are your best customers, and then acquiring those is the way to go, no matter how big or small your company is. But for some business models, it's basically crucial. I mean, imagine for grocery retail, where you are losing money for, I don't know, I've seen some data for more than 70% of your first-time buyers, you are losing money as a grocery
Mhm.
retailer. I mean, how come you continue to acquire those customers? Shouldn't you be looking at these kind of things and tweak so that you can increase the purchase frequency? Because you can break even only at, I don't know, 2.4 purchase frequency, and those kind of things, you can't improve what you don't measure, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's just it still kind of boggles my mind why we obsess over the revenue measures when we have industries like this where it's just so obvious that a significant fraction of the customers are clearly not profitable. And so, we can focus on the revenue, but like we all know, it's just much more extreme by profit. We just choose to ignore it. I think partially we ignore it because of data availability. I think the revenue data tends to be much more abundant, and so yeah, it can be somewhat rare that we have data sets that represent contribution profit at the transaction level. So that I understand. Yeah, it's kind of we can study what we can measure, and to the extent that we don't have um, publicly accessible data sets for profitability, that makes it a little bit harder. Um, I think the thing that I agree with is I think there likely is a relationship between penetration and purchase frequency, and that's one of the big things uh, that that Byron emphasizes, and there's no reason that wouldn't fit within our framework. All it means is that there is an extra coefficient in our model, where if you had some variable that represents purchase propensity, that purchase propensity is a function not only of the customer's inherent baseline, but also of the penetration of the company. And we can insert that in our model and allow there to be a relationship there. And I wouldn't be surprised if it gets picked up. And so there's nothing that would prevent us from including that in our model. And something like that would ultimately imply that we should focus, all else being equal, we should focus more on acquisition, because it means that acquisition is not only going to benefit us through bringing new customers into the company, but it's also going to expand the value of our existing customers by getting them to repeat purchase with a higher frequency. So that I think is fair. I think the flip side, though, is that the typical model that they will use is just the plain old NBD model. I don't want to go too much into the math here, but essentially what that model does not have is it doesn't have a death process, a model for attrition. And so I think if we were to focus on categories where we wouldn't really expect a whole lot of attrition, that model could do a good job of explaining purchase behavior. But as soon as you start looking at real data sets for retailers, for e-commerce companies, for a lot of things, for every category that we'll look at, we will see customer churn. We know customers churn. And so you think if you know the customers churn, you want to have that in your model. But
Yeah.
there's no component of that in theirs. So I think that also is a way that if they were to have that component and allow for the possibility that there is death, maybe for some of those CPG categories that they focus on, it's just going to wash itself out of the model because we will infer no death. But I think as soon as you start moving to some of these other categories like mobile gaming, they're just going to have very poor fits. And so we wouldn't trust the inferences from that model because it's not going to validate well.
Yeah, I love it, and I totally agree with that. I have a challenge for you. If you want to build a list of, I don't know, let's say 6 reasons together about why retail leaders should adopt customer lifetime value in in their businesses. So you can go first. And so basically, if you go first, you'll have 4, and I will have only 2. And we have a comprehensive list. Yeah.
Why retailers should adopt customer lifetime value? Well, I'll give you the dumbest first one. They'll make more money. I don't know if I need another 5.
Yeah, I think one that they should be caring about is that their teams will be more aligned, because if they make more money, they could if they adopt CLV, they would be giving clear paths to profitability to various departments, and that will lead to better relationships at their job. I mean, for them, for those leaders, not for their companies only.
Yeah, here another couple. The marketing department will get more budget potentially, to the extent that they can explain return on investment of their campaigns in a way that CFOs will appreciate and respect. They're more likely to get the CFO to say thumbs up on that investment. So that's another one. And then a third one, or I guess this would be the fourth, inclusive of yours, is building bridges to the investment community, that they'll be able to communicate better with investors. The investors will understand their businesses better. And I think that'll lead to better pricing of the equity of those companies.
Love it. My second and the last is regarding the amplification that they will get from their customers, because the retail growth flywheel is not only about acquiring customers. It's like Peter Drucker said, the purpose of a business is to create and to keep a customer. So in order to keep a customer, you need to track what matters and how you keep that customer, unless you monitor the CLV. And once you do that, then you can get customers you can get the best customers out there, which are more eager to also advocate for you. So basically, you could get more evangelists, which means word of mouth, which means free advertising, which means growth for your company eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of torn about the final one, because there's a few good possibilities. But I guess if I had to wrap, everyone's been talking about ESG and sustainability, and we want to have sustainability. Well, the Business Roundtable, the first group of stakeholders that they said we should focus on, not just the investors, are customers. And I think having a more sustainable enterprise is valuable in its own right. I think a lot of companies, when they don't care about CLV and they're looking to hit that next quarterly earnings target, that there can be an incentive to kind of rob the piggy bank and generate bad profits that bring about some profit in the short term, but may not necessarily be the best for the long-term value of the enterprise. I think by focusing more on CLV and being able to communicate that value to the investment community, kind of to give them the air cover to make those decisions, they'll put themselves on more sustainable footing for the long run.
Totally agree. So those were the 6. I think there are plenty of those. I mean, if we keep it
oh
going,
yeah, it's probably at least 12.
Well, we can do another episode maybe next year, so that we can finish this list. I have a question regarding you've said something really, really important, which I don't want to leave it there. You've said that maybe part of the lack of adoption at the company's level of the CLV is that we as an industry, let's say, we haven't agreed about a model, which is the model. What's your opinion about it? What's your suggestion about defining such a model? Because it's not a simple metric. It needs to be adopted for non-transactional versus transactional companies. But what can we do as an industry to build a model which is visible and transparent and adopted?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I would distinguish between model and measure. I think the model that's best for a company could be quite variable depending on the nature of the business, and also depending on the nature of the data that's available. So you could, obviously, you mentioned subscription, non-subscription, different models. even within companies within the same industry, you could imagine that the most appropriate model first would be very different for an investor versus someone on the inside that has much richer data. The insider could build cohort-specific models. The outsider may not even be able to create a model because they don't have sufficient public disclosure. But even between two companies where we're talking about insiders at both companies, if one company has better data recording systems, then they can specify even richer models or more segment-specific models. So you could just imagine that the availability or lack thereof of data, could lead to potentially of different models within companies within the same category. I think there's certain models that we would recommend that are quite robust and work very well across a very broad range of settings. But I'm not quite as dogmatic about, like, you need to only use this model. Like, if there was some other model that just so happened to be more accurate at the individual level, I think that they should use that other model. So for the model, I think the hope is that it's at the individual level and that it validates well. I think that if they can do that, I'd say thumbs up. I think when it comes to the measure, though, that's where I start getting semi-religiously dogmatic. That should be the same if you're B2B, B2C, subscription, non-subscription, have a lot of data, have a little data. CLV should be the same. It should be the net present value of the customer. And so, I think it should represent the variable profitability of a customer. So taking into account variable costs on the purchases that the customer makes after acquisition, and that it takes into account the amount that was spent to bring the customer in the first place. And I think, again, there's a whole measurement question, which brings us back to model. But in terms of what that measure should be, I think that's what CLV should be.
Totally agree. I really appreciate your presence in this episode. Unfortunately, we need to wrap it up. So I intend to invite you in a future episode. I think we're far from exhausting the topics that we could address together. Where can people reach out to you? Where can they find more about you and what you're doing, Professor McCarthy?
LinkedIn and Twitter are great platforms for me. So if you just Google for Daniel McCarthy, Emory, LinkedIn, hopefully that should pull me up. And then on Twitter, I'm also pretty active. So D_MCCAR, so D McCar. So I talk about this sort of stuff all the time there. So if you found this to be interesting, I think you'd enjoy that. And then also follow Theta. We have a lot of great content. Today we're putting out a brand new deep dive into Wayfair, incorporating all of their recent results from today. So really great stuff. So if you're interested in these sort of analyses, I think you'll find a lot more good content there.
Perfect. So I guess that's the website where they should be looking at. That being said, thanks again for being part of this episode of the CVO Live, and thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see each other in the next episode. All the best from Bucharest.